Good morning, everybody. It's good to have you back. We're so glad that you could join another Wednesday webinar, proudly sponsored by the Dairy Standard Agency. I'm Jacqueline Odendaal from the DSA, and Janrik Klopper from Plaas Media will facilitate the question and answer session at the end of the presentation. Special thanks to Plaas Media for the marketing and technical support. We have a hot topic today with the title, My Dairy Farm is Foot and Mouth Disease Positive. What now? I believe that you will have a lot of questions, which you are welcome to write in the question bar, or you can raise your hand during the Q&A session to ask your question then directly to our presenter. You will then find that if you ask your question, Yandri will allow you, but you still need to unmute yourself on your computer. For the second time this year, we are in a very fortunate position to have a well-known expert, Dr. Mark Chimes, with us today. He will explain with examples of outbreaks on dairy farms what the implications are when a dairy farm is affected by FMD, especially when the farm is placed under quarantine or situated within a disease management area. It gives me absolute great pleasure to introduce Dr. Mark Chimes, veterinary advisor and manager of the Animal Health and Welfare Program for Milk South Africa. Over to you, Dr. Mark. We are looking forward to your presentation.
Thank you, Jacqueline, and thank you very much for the opportunity to be able to present this talk on foot and mouth. It's obviously, as you said, quite a hot topic at the moment. First of all, it's important to understand that foot and mouth disease is not contagious for humans at all. It's different from the hand, foot and mouth disease that you can get in humans. That's a totally different disease, nothing to do with foot and mouth. So people are perfectly safe from foot and mouth. Now, first of all, the focus of this talk will be on the control measures primarily and how that's going to affect you, because that's where the major effect comes from. And as it says there, if the disease does not destroy you, then the control measures will. Sometimes the control measures are more severe than the actual disease. Strict biosecurity, I know it's essential and it's definitely something you should do, but it will not stop this disease necessarily. We've seen it in cases where neighboring farms had foot and mouth disease, and then your farm is under very strict, very good biosecurity, and still the disease got you over the fence. So biosecurity will certainly help and will reduce the chances of you getting it, but don't have a false sense of security just because you've got good biosecurity. The major cause of this disease spreading over large distances is primarily from animals being moved illegally. And this is mainly driven by a lack of market access, where people are desperate. They have these animals, they're under quarantine, they can't sell these animals, they can't move these animals, and then they start moving them at night, etc. And that is something that the communities have to work together to try and prevent this. Once it gets to a new region, it then spreads locally. Mainly through direct contact of the animals through the fences, or with people moving from one farm to the other, from an infected farm to an uninfected farm. We saw it in Gauteng, where the dairy got infected with foot and mouth disease. The animals hadn't shown symptoms yet, but they were excreting the virus. And obviously the staff were moving between the various farms. And then once the first farm showed symptoms, they obviously stopped movement between the farms, but it had already spread to the other farms at that stage, unknowing to them. And I've got this 5-day isolation rule mentioned there. And this is because they've experimentally found by swabbing people's throats after they've handled animals that they have they can extract the foot and mouth disease virus from their throats for up to 48 hours afterwards. And therefore the risk exists that you could, if you've been handling animals, that you could transfer it to another farm if you go and handle the animals there. And for some reason, we got this 5-day rule where you have to isolate yourself and not go and work with other cows for the next 5 days. It is probably a bit excessive, but until proven otherwise, this is the rule that's being followed. But I would certainly say for at least 48 hours. What we did find in the UK when they had that outbreak in the 90s, vets were moving from one farm to the next, not on the same day though. They would be on one farm today, excuse me, and then they would move to the next farm on the next day. But that's after they've gone home, had a change of clothes, showered, and etc. When they worked with the animals, they were wearing gloves and wearing masks, etc. And there was no evidence there that it had been spread by the vets. But even so, I would say be careful with this for at least 48 hours after you've handled infected animals. There's also a strong suspicion that wind is transferring it. We saw it in the Eastern Cape, where foot and mouth disease would occur on one farm, and then it would jump to farms and infect a third farm further down the line, especially after they've had those notorious winds, which the Eastern Cape is known for. And it seems to spread downwind. So there's definitely a lot of evidence that it spreads with the wind. And then with water, we're not sure what the role is. It's probably underestimated, but there are suspicions where a farm was infected and then another farm further downstream suddenly gets foot and mouth disease if those animals had access to the stream at the infected farm as well as at the uninfected farm. And I also heard of a case recently where a farmer had bought manure from a feedlot that was infected with foot and mouth disease. He spread the manure on his fields, and he's suffering with foot and mouth disease as a result. So we suspect that he actually brought it in with the manure. Just a quick recap on the current situation in South Africa. I'm not going to go into details here, but basically the biggest problem currently is in KwaZulu-Natal, where for all practical purposes it seems to be out of control. And then it spread from there to Mpumalanga, mainly all along the border with KZN. And from there, then suddenly we had outbreaks in Gauteng, and that was mainly through the illegal movement of animals that had brought it there, and then it started spreading locally in Gauteng. And we've recently had outbreaks in Potchefstroom in Northwest, as well as in Kroonstad in the Orange Free State. Once again, these are animals that have been moved. This is not natural spread of the virus by itself. And we've now had an outbreak, I think, in the Delmas area has been confirmed, with obviously rumors of further outbreaks as well in Mpumalanga. So currently the only provinces that don't have foot and mouth is the Northern Cape and Western Cape that hasn't had any cases, and Limpopo, who's cleared their infections, and I guess they're holding their breath that it's not going to be spread back. Fortunately, most of the illegal animal movement is from Limpopo down to Gauteng and not in the other direction. So hopefully they'll be safe in that respect. So how's this diagnosed? Now, the first suspicion is normally on the sign of clinical disease, where you see animals with sore mouths and sore feet, and you get the vet in. He looks at it, looks suspect, and he notifies the state vet. Then the state vet comes out, and he will take swabs from the throat as well as blood. And the swabs from the throat, they do a test called the PCR test. And this test tests for DNA and RNA. So it can pick up very small quantities of the virus, and it tests for the actual virus, whether it's alive or dead, if there's DNA or RNA remaining. Now, foot and mouth disease is an RNA virus. So it'll pick up the RNA, which means it's a very sensitive test in the early stages to show that there's an active infection. Then the blood tests are sent off for antibodies, for serology. Now, antibodies don't form immediately. So when you pick up a virus, your immune system will respond to the virus and you'll start producing antibodies. But in the early stages, it can take up to 2 weeks before the antibodies reach a level where it's detectable on a lab test. So your antibody test is a bit slower, but it can be picked up for several months afterwards. You can still pick up the antibodies. So it gives you a very good idea of the history of whether these animals had been exposed to the virus. It doesn't mean that they actually got sick. You can get an infection and clear it without showing any symptoms, but you will have antibodies because your immune system did what it was supposed to do in the first place. So antibodies give us a historic overview. So that's why if they get to your farm several weeks later and they test and they find antibodies, they will know that you had foot and mouth disease on your farm at some stage in the previous months. So, and then obviously the swabs are also sent off for viral culture. This is an expensive and a slow process where they have to grow the virus, and then they harvest this virus and they analyze it to then determine what type it is that we've got. And in South Africa, we've got 3 types of foot and mouth. That's the SAT1, the SAT2, and the SAT3. The SAT stands for South African territories, and it only really occurs in the southern part of Africa, down this side. It's supposedly less severe than the northern types. In Europe and in the northern hemisphere, you get your Asia strains, your A virus, your O virus, which cause much more severe symptoms. But we find in dairy cattle that the SAT viruses are just as destructive. Now, if there's a suspicion of foot and mouth disease on your farm, the minute it's suspected, you will be placed under provisional quarantine. Now, the law states that if you are exposed, or if there's a suspicion, not even if you're diagnosed, if there's a suspicion of a controlled disease on your farm, you need to notify your neighbors by law. The state will not notify them because they're not allowed to hand out your private information, but they expect you to go and notify the farmers. However, they will be visiting the neighboring farms to go and check if this disease is spread in the meantime. Then they'll take their samples and they'll send it off to the laboratory, and then once it's confirmed, you will then actually be placed under quarantine. The farms surrounding you will most likely be placed under quarantine for up to 10 kilometers away, while the state then goes and checks on these farms if any animals are showing symptoms, and they will also take blood to test the serum for antibodies to check if there's been any exposure recently in that area. If your farm is vaccinated, you will also be placed under quarantine. So during this talk, when I'm talking about a quarantined farm, I'm including vaccinated farms. Even if you were vaccinated, you never had foot and mouth disease, and none of your animals got infected, you will still be placed under quarantine. Then I've put in here day 0. What is important about day 0 is that there's a lot of things, and you'll see it later in the talk, that's measured from day 0. Day 0 is the day where the state vet determines that you no longer have active infection on your farm. So normally what they will do is, after the last cow has shown symptoms, they'll wait about 14 days, and the 14 days is because that is the sort of maximum incubation period for foot and mouth disease, or generally accepted. In other words, if the virus gets onto your farm, if the animals are going to show any symptoms, they will do it within 14 days. If there's no symptoms within 14 days, you probably do not have foot and mouth disease. But to be safe, we tend to go for 28 days, which is twice the incubation period. So in other words, if there's been no animals in a 2 times the incubation period that are showing symptoms, then it's highly unlikely that you've still got active virus on your farm. So the state vet will come out 2 weeks after the last case, in the perfect world, obviously, if you can get to your farm in time. He'll check, he'll see there's no new animals with symptoms. Then he'll come out again 2 weeks later, and if there's still no new animals that are showing symptoms, that will then be your day 0. If you were a vaccinated farm, your day 0 will be determined as the date the last animal was vaccinated. Even though that was 28 days ago, your day 0 will be moved back to 28 days ago. So what you need to understand is that the quarantine period lasts for 12 months from day 0. And to lift the quarantine, once you've reached your 1 year post day 0, the state vet will come out and he will do 2 inspections. Once again, they will do it 2 weeks apart. And if there's no new cases, so he'll come out on the 12-month day and then 2 weeks later come out again. If there are no new cases, then he'll say, okay, it looks like you're clean. And they will take blood from animals that were born at least 2 months after day 0 and are at least 6 months old. They must be weaned. The reason for that is that this virus is excreted in the milk, first of all. So all calves that were drinking from infected cows will have antibodies. Plus also the antibodies from the cow is transferred to the calf in the milk with the colostrum. So if a calf was drinking from a cow that had antibodies in her milk, he will have those antibodies, and it takes about 6 months for these antibodies to disappear from the calf's system. And that is why they will say, well, let's look at all the animals that were born or new animals that were introduced to the farm, which is highly unlikely because you're under quarantine, so you can't introduce new animals. But they will look at the calves born 2 months after day 0, and these calves must be weaned, so they must be at least 6 months old. And if there's no antibodies, then he will say, okay, you are clear. He will then report it to National, and they will say, okay, everything's good, and then they can say that quarantine is lifted. But there are delays. Remember, the state vets are extremely busy with foot and mouth disease because they're busy running around inspecting farms that are suspect. They're re-inspecting farms that have been confirmed or that were suspect, taking samples. They're vaccinating the animals. They're branding the animals. They're issuing Red Cross permits to transport animals and milk off these farms. And in between all that, they still have to do their regular work. You know, we still have horse sickness, brucellosis, tuberculosis, African swine fever, bird flu, etc. So the other work hasn't disappeared, and they really, really are overworked during an outbreak. The other thing is also that the laboratory currently is swamped with samples from all these infected farms. And due to, I mean, they weren't designed for outbreaks. They were designed for normal maintenance, doing surveillance to check that we don't have the disease. So currently there's a 3 to 4 week waiting period for results. And that is why, as I said right at the bottom, expect quarantine to last at least 16 months. And the reason is you'll be placed under quarantine, provisional, when they suspect the disease. Then once it's confirmed, you are now officially quarantined. Then it takes about 2 to 3 months before you reach day 0. And then your 12-month period starts. And then at the end of the 12 months, they come out and they check you, and then they have to check you 2 weeks later again and take bloods, send it off, and then you have to wait for the lab results, which could be another 3 to 4 weeks. When that comes back, then there's the processing of the paperwork, etc., which is another week or 2, and only then is quarantine lifted. So you must understand, if you're going to be under quarantine, it's going to be a long ride. So what do you do if there is foot and mouth disease in your area? The first thing you do is, especially if your neighbor has foot and mouth disease, get him to move his animals away from the fence and move your animals away from the fence to try and prevent contact through the fences. And also you want to try and get as large a distance as possible between your animals and the infected farm, or if you're infected, keep your animals away from your neighbors as far as possible so that it doesn't spread by air quite as easily. Don't introduce any new animals on your farm if you can avoid it, especially if you're buying animals from areas where there has been foot and mouth disease recently. And if you do, quarantine them as far away from your other animals for at least 28 days. Once again, it's this 2-week incubation periods times 2 to make sure that they won't, that they don't have any, develop any symptoms in the meantime. Access control is quite important. I would say that your biggest danger is actually if your neighbor has a foot and mouth disease, that it can spread over the fence, or that it can spread from your farm to your neighbors. It can be spread by vehicles and personnel. The highest risk is actually vehicles that have transported animals. So if they're coming to your farm to pick up cull animals, they must make sure that that vehicle is properly washed and disinfected before it gets onto your farm. Once it's unloaded, your animals needs to be properly washed and disinfected before it goes to the next farm. And then obviously people that actually handle the animals, like veterinarians, for instance, or state vets, animal health technicians, they are high risk. They're the ones that have their faces in the faces of the cows and then go to the next farm and start wrestling cows on that farm as well. So they're the high risk. Other people that come onto your farm, such as the feed lorries and the milk lorries, even the guys that service the milk machines or comes to fix your irrigation pumps, they're not handling the animals. They're not in contact with the animals. They are generally lower risk, not zero risk, because obviously that can be transported maybe on the wheels of their vehicles. And that is why you want to allow visitors only to the designated areas. Now, on dairy farms, this is actually quite easy because most vehicles only have access to the parking area in front of the parlour. And what you want to do is make sure that these vehicles can only park in that area and that your cows do not walk through that area. So the cars and the cows should never be passing through the same area. Unfortunately, with most farms, you have to drive down the road and these cows have to cross the roads to get from one camp to the other. But that doesn't seem to be a high risk. And the other thing is also if you are washing vehicles or trucks on your farm before they leave your farm, make sure that the runoff from that water does not go to the areas which the cows have access to and that it doesn't get into your water sources as well. And obviously just making sure that if personnel that are handling the animals, that they handle the sick animals last. Let them work with the healthy animals. They must change their clothes on the farm when they go home. When they come in, they must change and put on their clean overalls and gumboots which have been washed and disinfected overnight. If they're going to handle animals, let them wear gloves or even masks if necessary to try and not spread this disease further. Now, the disinfectants that you can use, your normal chlorine that most people use, bleach, and that does not kill foot and mouth disease virus. Okay, and neither do your iodine-based and one I haven't mentioned here, your quaternary ammonias, they don't kill the virus. The products that do work, and this list is by no means complete. There are other products. I just don't know what they all are, but your vet and the state vet should be able to help you in this respect. But Virkon works, F10 works, ACT also works. Another one that you can use is 2% citric acid solution, if you can get hold of citric acid. The virus is very, very sensitive to sun and also low pH. So if the pH drops below 6, it kills the virus, and the lower the pH, if it goes down to 4 or 3, it kills the virus even quicker. Obviously, or if the pH goes above 9, it'll also kill the virus. If you're going to wash vehicles and disinfect them, make sure that you wash off all the organic matter. Then that means mud, dung, urine, etc. Because the disinfectants are not that effective in the presence of mud and dung, basically in other organic material. You want to make sure that the disinfectant gets onto the surfaces. So wash off these vehicles properly and then disinfect them. Just spraying the disinfectant over everything else, not as effective. And obviously for your personnel, they must disinfect their hands, their feet, their clothes, and any equipment that you use to handle the animals, like nose tongs especially. If you're using nose tongs to examine animals, have a bucket of disinfectant there, and in between each animal, dip it, put it in the bucket of disinfectant before the next cow comes into the crush to be handled, and let them just disinfect their hands in between as well. Now, the restrictions that is placed on you when you're under quarantine. First of all, you may only move animals from your farm to an abattoir under a Red Cross permit issued by the state vet. So any animal that you want to move off your farm, you have to notify the state vet. They will come out, they will check the animals, and then these animals are loaded on the truck. He will seal the truck and issue the Red Cross permit, and those animals may then only be moved to a foot and mouth disease approved abattoir. They may not go anywhere else. Now, this causes serious problems with a lot of dairy farms that have heifer farms, or farms where they raise their heifers, or where they keep their dry cows and only bring them to the parlour once they calve and they have to start producing milk. And if your parlour is infected and you've got a heifer farm or a dry cow farm somewhere else that's not infected, you will not be allowed to move those animals onto your quarantine farm. The state vet will not allow it, even with vaccination, because the state feels that you may only move animals currently from farms that have the same status. So if your heifer farm is infected and your parlour is infected, then you can move animals between the farms, obviously with permission from the state vet. On the other hand, if your heifer farm is infected and your parlour is not infected, once again, there is no ways they're going to allow you to move infected animals from a heifer farm or a dry cow farm to your parlour. So you're going to have to make other arrangements, because these heifers and dry cows are going to start calving and they have to get to a parlour to be milked. So if your dry cow farm or heifer farm is not infected, you're going to have to make a deal with another dairy farmer in the area whose farm is also not infected, and move your animals there and go into a share milk agreement of some sort to try and help these cows, because they're going to have to be milked. If your heifer farm or dry cow farm is infected and your parlour isn't, and you can't move these animals, you then have to try and find another dairy farm that is also under quarantine that was infected, so that they have the same status, and then try and convince the state vet that you can move these animals from your infected farm to somebody else's infected farm, so that these cows can be milked. It causes major problems to try and solve this problem. Excuse me. A similar problem arises with cull cows. If you're under quarantine, you can't move animals off your farm, and these animals can only go to a foot and mouth disease approved abattoir, and the likelihood that there will be an abattoir in your area that is approved for foot and mouth disease is almost zero. And we'll get to that problem in a moment. So now these cows are accumulating on your farm, and they need to be fed and treated, and some of them are severely ill. So it's a welfare issue, and these animals have to be put down for their own sake. So you end up shooting the cows on the farm. The first guy in the Eastern Cape that got foot and mouth disease, he shot more than 130 cows that he had to bury on his farm. Okay, it's not a joke. It is a serious problem, this. And the same problem arose with the calves on the farm, because now you have your bull calves that you would normally sell to a calf rearer, or they'd be sent to the abattoir as veal. They can't be moved. They can't be moved off the farm. And they start accumulating, and the farmers don't have the space, they don't have the labor, and they don't have the money to rear all these calves until they're a slaughter age, which would be ideal, because if you can keep them long enough, eventually they can go to the abattoir. As I say, we'll get to those rules in a minute. But it's a major welfare issue, and the psychological effect that it has on the farmer and his personnel with having to basically kill these animals on farm and bury them, it's got quite a severe psychological impact as well. Milk processing restrictions, that's the other problem you're going to have to deal with, because if your farm is under quarantine, so in other words, whether you're infected or vaccinated, same rules apply. Even if you're vaccinated and you don't have foot and mouth disease on your farm, all your milk now has to be either double pasteurized or used for UHT, long life milk. Those are the only thing. And the only one that's allowed to be exported is the UHT milk. So all the other milk, the double pasteurization, is so that it can be allowed into the local market. The problem is, if the milk is UHT treated or double pasteurized, it is not fit to use for making cheese. So if you're supplying milk to a processor that only produces cheese, like we had in the Eastern Cape, he can't use your milk. He can't take it because there's nothing he can do with the milk. And he's not allowed to make cheese with the milk unless it's double pasteurized or UHT treated. So now you have to find another processor that can double pasteurize or produces UHT to take your milk. And he might not be quite as close. So now you have a transport issue where you've got to transport this milk much, much further. The further problem is that for these processes that have to take the milk is double pasteurization is a practical limitation for them, because if you pasteurize the milk, now you have to have a tank to cool it down. But now it needs two tanks, because while one's cooling down, he's busy pasteurizing the next lot, and it goes into another tank. And then once this lot's cooled down, he can then pasteurize it again. And they don't always have the facilities to do this, and obviously installing new tanks doesn't happen overnight. UHT processors, there's only a limited number of processors in the country that can produce UHT milk as well, and they're not necessarily close by. And in addition, if a milk processor accepts any milk from a farm that is under quarantine, and in some cases within 10 kilometers of a farm that is under quarantine, so you don't even have foot and mouth disease, you're not vaccinated or anything, but you're within 10 kilometers of a farm that is under quarantine, they will lose their export license until they can prove that they can keep the infected and the uninfected milk totally separate in their factory. So in other words, they have to first pasteurize all the uninfected milk from the farms that are not under quarantine, and then they can process the infected milk or quarantined milk. And then after that, they have to clean and disinfect the whole plant before they can then process the uninfected milk again. So it causes major problems. And to try and shift this milk between different processes and trying to make plans to try and it was quite a challenge. The problem is also that the virus is excreted in the milk in very, very high numbers. This virus just absolutely loves the udders of cows, and it multiplies. And if you give this milk to your calves, they will get foot and mouth disease. And in calves, it leads to deaths in quite a large proportion of calves, where it causes a myocarditis, which is an inflammation of the heart, and they die of it. The same also, don't give it to pigs, because pigs can get foot and mouth disease. And pigs are known as what we call multipliers. They're not highly susceptible to the virus, but when they do get it, they produce about 10 times more virus than cows. So they can be a major source of infection on the farm. So this milk may not be given to calves or pigs unless it is either boiled or pasteurized, that it can kill the virus. And that leads to the next problem. A large proportion of your cows are going to have severe mastitis and going to produce really, really poor quality milk. We're talking, it's almost like butter coming out of those udders. That milk is totally unusable. The milk processors do not want to accept it. So what you tend to do is you split your herd in two, where you have your cows with mastitis milk going in one tank, and the cows with the better quality milk going into another tank, which is at least milk that you can sell to keep yourself alive in the meantime. But this bad milk has to be disposed. And how do you dispose of it? Because it's full of virus. Most farmers dump it into their slurry dams, but we don't know the effect. How long does the virus survive in the slurry dams? What happens if you now spray all the slurry out on your fields? Does that spread the virus? What are the risks? We are working on doing some experiments and surveys on this, but it's going to be a while before we have the answers. The best alternative is to dig a pit and all the bad milk needs to go into that pit. And ideally, it should be acidified by adding something that makes the milk more sour, although it'll probably turn sour by itself anyway. But we have to make sure that this pit is properly covered so that other animals can't get in there to come and drink the milk and then spread the virus. And also make sure that it's far away from underground water sources or surface water courses, so that this milk doesn't then run into the water source and potentially spread the virus that way. And on some of these farms, I mean, they were dumping, we're talking 10, 20, 30,000 liters of milk a day. It's a massive pit to be able to accommodate that amount of milk. It's normally only in the first, say, 4 to 6 weeks that this is a major problem, and then it seems to calm down, and by about 3 months after the first cow showed symptoms, things are back to fairly normal in terms of milk quality. You'll still have problems, but you won't be dumping these massive amounts of milk that is just totally unusable, that nobody can use whatsoever. Meat processing, as I mentioned, quarantined animals may only be moved to a foot and mouth disease designated abattoir under a Red Cross permit. And this means whenever you want to load animals, you have to phone the state vet. They've got to come out, check the animals, load the animals, seal the truck, issue the Red Cross permit, and then the truck can go off to the abattoir. And this will apply for the first 6 months after day 0. From 6 months after day 0, your animals may be slaughtered at any abattoir, but they are still under movement permits, just so that you know. And the practicalities of the problems we saw here, first of all, is the abattoirs that were willing to be designated as foot and mouth disease abattoirs frequently didn't have the facilities to do what was necessary. And I'll explain that in a moment as well. So that the result that they didn't qualify. And although they were willing to bring in all these measures, it takes weeks, if not months, to do things that weren't in place, like fencing your area for all the discarded material that has to be either incinerated or whatever the case might be. They've got to install incinerators, for instance, which they don't have. They've got to have showers for entering and leaving the premises for their staff because they're working with foot and mouth disease carcasses, etc. So it can take a long time. On the other hand, those that do have these facilities, the larger ones that can handle the volumes, frequently don't want to be designated as a foot and mouth disease abattoir, because as soon as they do that, they lose their export license. And now they can't export meat, any meat that comes from that abattoir. In addition, these carcasses have to hang for at least 24 hours after being slaughtered so that the pH in the meat will drop below 6 degrees. pH will drop below 6, which means, and it needs to be kept separate from the uninfected carcasses. So now it means you need 2 cooling rooms to keep them in. And you don't always have the facilities or the money. These things are expensive to erect. So there's a lot of practicalities. And if you only start to designate abattoirs for foot and mouth disease once you have an outbreak, you're 3 months behind. These things need to be designated and sorted out well before foot and mouth disease reaches your area. And this is a problem that we're definitely working on, that countrywide we need to get abattoirs FMD approved just for in case. If this virus spreads, that we can at least carry on trading, because that is the biggest motivator for people to move animals illegally. It's because they don't have access to markets. They're dying of hunger. They've got to pay bills. The kids have got to go to school, etc. And you've got to sell animals to make money. And how do you do it? You move them into areas where there's no control, foot and mouth control, and as a result, the disease gets spread that way. Another problem we experienced in the Eastern Cape was, let's say there was an abattoir in East London that was foot and mouth disease designated, that could handle a fairly large volumes. The one we had in the Eastern Cape could only slaughter like 20 animals a day, and there was a waiting list of over 1,000 animals. So the one in the East London volunteered to be designated foot and mouth. They qualified, and they said, okay, we will slaughter foot and mouth disease animals on Tuesdays, for argument's sake. So now, Tuesday morning, the animals need to be loaded in Tsitsikamma. It's 400 kilometers away. So now they have to wait for the state vet to come out. He inspects the animals, which takes a few hours. He has to physically inspect every animal's mouth. Then they load it on the truck, and the truck is sealed. So that truck leaves the farm at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. It gets to East London at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. Now the abattoir can't slaughter these animals. So the animals have to stay overnight there. Now they're going to be slaughtered on a Wednesday, which was not a foot and mouth designated day. So now they've got to slaughter these animals, close the plant, disinfect the whole plant again before they can slaughter any other animals that came from all the other farms that aren't infected. So the problem in the end was solved by loading these animals the night before and the truck driving through the night, so it gets there on the Tuesday morning, which is the FMD designated day for slaughtering, so that these animals can be slaughtered on that day. These are the practicalities that nobody foresaw or nobody thought of, that had to be solved. And this was done through cooperation by the farmers, the state vets, everybody that was involved in this. Now, this is the meat processing situation. When your farm is quarantined, and the time here on the left, this is day 0, if you can see the little red dot. From day 0 to day 14, if you want to send animals for slaughter, then the abattoir must be able to hang the carcasses for 24 hours at least, so that the pH drops below 6. They must destroy the heads, including the tongues and feet. Must be cut off and destroyed, incinerated. All offal must also be incinerated. The carcass must be deboned, deglanded, and the meat may only be used for process, and it must be processed. In other words, you make bologna out of it or whatever. Very, very few abattoirs have the facilities to do this, and those that do tend to be export abattoirs, so they're less unlikely to want to take foot and mouth disease cases. From day 14 to 6 weeks after day 0, you still have to comply with everything except the meat does not have to be processed anymore. But you still have to degland, debone, destroy the offal, destroy the heads, feet, and tongues. And there's virtually nothing left of the carcass. The amount of money that you can get, because the 5th quarter, which is the heads, feet, tongue, the offal, etc., is a big part, or this is a significant part of income for a beef farmer especially. From 6 weeks after day 0, things start to look a bit better, because now you no longer have to debone the carcass or degland it or process the meat. You only have to throw away the offal, I'm saying only, and the head and feet, and the carcass obviously still has to hang. But from 3 months, you're only throwing away the head, feet, and tongue. You're no longer necessary to throw away the offal. And that is why most farmers will only start sending animals for slaughter 3 months after day 0, if you can hold out until such a time, because your income is just so much better from the carcass. And then obviously from 6 months onwards, you don't have to throw away anything anymore. They can go to any abattoir. It's just the meat still has to hang for 24 hours. So the abattoir must just be able to hang your carcasses separate from the uninfected animals for 24 hours, so that the meat may then be sold. So as a rule, you're looking at up to 3 months after day 0 before you'll be able to actually slaughter your animals, for the average farmer and for the average abattoir to be able to handle it. So what happens over the next year? As I said, after 6 months, you may slaughter at any abattoir. And then once the quarantine is lifted, officially lifted, your animals may be sold, okay, to other farmers, etc., like normal, except they must be traceable for the rest of their lives. So the records must be kept of where these animals are. So especially for stud farmers, This has major implications because for up to a year, you may only slaughter animals from your stud farm. You may not sell live animals. And you can just imagine the effect that has. And obviously, all animals that are vaccinated or infected are branded with an F on the neck so that they can be identified, so that you know where these animals are. So coming to the symptoms, what will you notice if you get foot and mouth disease on your farm? Well, first of all, you'll notice sores in the mouth and sores between the claws and sores on the teats and udders. Okay. Now, the sores in the mouth leads to a lot of salivation, so they stand there and they drool, these animals. You can see it very clearly. Obviously, just having one animal drool does not mean you have foot and mouth disease. It's quite common. Could be other causes. Cows eat silly things, so there could be other causes of the salivation. Remember, foot and mouth disease is highly contagious. So this is a disease that spreads like wildfire. By day 1, you'll have 2 or 3 cases. By day 2, it'll be 12. Days in 1 week, you'll be looking at 120 animals being affected by it. To a more or less degree, not all animals get it as severe. Some animals won't show symptoms at all. And generally within 14 days, once an animal starts to show symptoms, within 10 to 14 days, they're over it and they carry on as normal. The infection on your farm with animals showing symptoms can take 4 to 6 weeks. If you're lucky, you should be over the worst. And then by about 3 months, things should be looking pretty normal and you should be seeing no more new cases. The other thing is with dairy animals, it causes a severe mastitis. Their somatic cell count will just shoot through the roof, which means that you end up having to test all your cows every morning and every evening milking so that you can identify the cows that are coming down with mastitis, so you can keep them in a separate group so that you can still have some decent quality milk that you can sell to your milk buyer, and the really frothed milk you're going to have to dump. And it's important to identify these cows early on. In calves, as I've mentioned, it can cause death. They die from tiger heart disease. When you do a post-mortem, you see these sort of white stripes in the heart muscle, which indicates a myocarditis from the virus. And it can affect up to 20 to 30% of your calves. So keep them away from the infected cows and do not give them the infected milk. Just switch over to powder milk for the time being until your outbreak is over, unless you can boil or pasteurize the milk on the farm, which the average farmer obviously can't do. And the milk production in these cows, some of them lose 1/4, some of them just lose the whole udder, some of them get the teats, literally. They lose the teats from infection and from the sores that get in. A lot of these cows, you end up not being able to milk, or it's not worth keeping them afterwards because of permanent damage. Others will recover after a period. It just takes time. So the symptoms, as I mentioned, the picture on the left shows you the drooling that you notice, and they have this sort of saliva just hangs out of the mouth because they can't swallow. Their throats are so sore. And then obviously you see the lesions on the inside the mouth, especially on the palate and also on the tongue. You get these sores. And the picture on the right actually shows this happens quite easily when you're examining these animals and you're pulling out the tongue. The actual surface skin of the tongue just comes off completely. Udders, get sores in the udders, sores on the teats, and obviously the sores between the claws. And then once again on the right-hand side, that's a tongue from an abattoir. And this disease has major financial effects on the farm. Number one, you lose milk production, as I've explained already. You lose your slaughter income because you have to cull these animals on your farm because you can't get them to an abattoir for the first 3 months or so. You lose income from your cull cows and your calf sales. There's an increased culling rate. So now you have less cows left producing less milk once this outbreak is over. Then the cost of veterinarian and the veterinary medicines, self-explanatory. Overtime for the labor to treat all the cows. Remember, Some of these farms, they start milking, say, at 5 in the morning, they finish by 8 or 9 o'clock, then they start treating all these mastitis cows, and they finish at about 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and now they have to start with the evening milking, and then they're milking till 6, 7 o'clock tonight, and then they have to start the evening treatments, and they finish at 11 o'clock tonight. 5 o'clock tomorrow morning, they have to be back in the parlour for the next milking, and it goes on like that for 2, 3, 4 weeks. People are exhausted. It has major labor implications. And then there's the additional transport cost. Remember, as I said, now you have to find another milk buyer, perhaps, or you need to find an abattoir, the one that's approved to slaughter your animals could be miles away. As I said, from Tsitsikamma, they now have to transport animals 400 or 500 kilometers to East London to be slaughtered. And the other thing is obviously the stud breeders can't sell stud animals for 1 year. Treatment, there's no treatment. All you do is you treat them symptomatic. First of all, you give them anti-inflammatories. And the one that seems to work the best by most farmers' accounts is Rimadyl. Antibiotics are only indicated if there's actual bacterial infection secondary to the virus. The antibiotics do not work for viruses. They don't do anything to a virus. And this includes mastitis treatment. This is a viral mastitis. In most cases, there's no bacterial infection. So using mastitis treatment on these animals, unless there's signs or unless you can do cultures and see there's bacterial infection, you're wasting time and money. But most farmers do it because they just have no other options, really. And then obviously having antibacterial or antiseptic ointment that you can rub onto the udders and teats that are affected. These animals have sore mouths. They can't eat, so give them soft feed. Keep the walking distances short. Those that are affected, keep them close to the parlour because they can't walk, they can't eat, they can't get to the grazing, and that's partly why your milk production also drops. And what the farmers have been doing is, in the face of an outbreak, they've injected the cows with multimin, ivermectin, and Inforce 3. Now, what I'm saying now is, I'm going to qualify it. There's no double-blind, placebo-controlled studies done to prove that this is effective or not, but the anecdotal evidence is certainly overwhelming that it helps. Multimin is just a multimineral vitamin supplement that boosts the animal's immunity. Ivermectin, there's obviously a lot going around about its effectiveness against RNA viruses. If nothing else, it gets rid of the parasites, so the cows under less production stress. And it might actually work if all these theories are true about ivermectin. And then Inforce 3 is a nasal vaccine for a respiratory disease that's got no effect directly on foot and mouth disease, but what it does do is it stimulates a local immune reaction in the nose, which is the main part through which the cows get the virus. And it causes a release of interferon, which has an antiviral effect. And it seems that these animals that have had this vaccine shortly before an outbreak are less likely to get the disease. It doesn't prevent it 100%, but certainly on farms where they've only done the milk cows and they didn't do the dry cows or the heifers, they had many more cases of foot and mouth disease in the dry cows and heifers, in other words, in the untreated ones. Just be careful if you're doing this, that you're not transferring the virus from one cow to the next cow with the intranasal applicator. You've got to change that applicator between each cow. Vaccination. I'm running a bit over time, but I'm near the end. All infected farms will be vaccinated by the state vet. If you are a neighboring farm, you can request to be vaccinated through the state. They will not force you to vaccinate because of the complications that once you're vaccinated, you will be placed under quarantine for the next year, and they are not willing to take the risk of being dragged to court because they're causing you financial losses as a result. So you must sign an indemnity form that you understand the complications or the implications of what you're doing, and that you're going to have problems moving milk and moving animals, etc. Now, vaccination does not guarantee freedom from infection. It only reduces the severity in varies. You will still get animals with foot and mouth. Some animals will still be severely affected, but you will have less animals with less severe symptoms generally, and it'll keep you in production, because once you get foot and mouth disease, you'll be under quarantine anyway. So you must just consider the effects on your vaccinated farm being placed under quarantine before you do it. However, if there's a farm within 10 kilometers of you that's got foot and mouth disease, you are probably better off vaccinating your herd. We've seen the effect in the Eastern Cape between the farms that volunteered to vaccinate those that didn't and got foot and mouth. They were placed under quarantine anyway because now they had foot and mouth, and the effect was much more severe on those farms as well. So it's a catch-22. You're going to be between a rock and a hard place. So to summarize, foot and mouth disease is a serious disease in dairy cattle. There's the cost of treating the disease, the actual losses that you suffer as a result of the disease in terms of veterinary costs, labor, and animals. You have this loss of milk production. So you have limited options to sell the milk, because now it's between you and your milk processor whether they can take your milk or not. You are limited in terms of cull animals. You end up having, for welfare reasons, culling them on the farm. You can't move these animals unless it's under a Red Cross permit, and only once day zero is passed. You're going to be under quarantine for at least 16 months. And the only real option that seems to work at this stage is still vaccination to help prevent it. Thank you. There will now be time for some questions and answers, I hope. Sorry if I've used up a lot of their question time as well.
So if you look at the top of your screen, you can use the raise hand function, and I will allow you to unmute yourself. Guy, you can ask your question.
Thanks. Mark, first of all, well done on a very, very good presentation. I think it's really what we need. Can you just shed light if an animal gets foot and mouth, and then he recovers or she recovers, do they remain carriers for the rest of their life or not? And my question is really, we've got beef farmers that obviously there won't be access to vaccination. And then it's going to go through their herds, not as severe as in dairy, but will those animals then be carriers for the rest of their life? Thank you.
That's a good question, Guy. No, it's the only official carrier of the virus are buffalo. Cows can remain infective, and I'm under correction, I think it's about 28 days after symptoms have stopped that they considered infectious. After that, very, very low chance of them transmitting the disease. But cows officially, no, they're not carriers. In fact, a cow that's had foot and mouth disease should have immunity against the disease, a better immunity than vaccination. I can't say if it lasts lifelong. What we do know is that the virus survives in the lymph nodes of the throat, especially the tonsils, for quite long periods. But what we do not know is whether enough virus is being excreted only from the tonsils to be able to infect other animals. So generally at this stage, and that's why they discard the head and the tongues for such a long period, for up to 3 months. So I would say after 3 months, you should be safe.
Rainda, you can unmute yourself and ask your question.
Good day, colleagues and health people. Thanks very much for your presentation, Dr. Mark. It's appreciated. I would like to know if there is any compensation whatsoever from government to help farmers if they had or have foot and mouth disease. It is, as what you said, it is great losses on the one hand, and it's also a risk later on the other hand. Thank you.
Yeah, Rainer, unfortunately, there is no compensation from the government. that is why the government is allowing us to continue producing milk and beef, despite having foot and mouth disease. In the Northern Hemisphere, in the European countries, if you have foot and mouth disease, they come in and they slaughter your whole herd. And that's how they get rid of the disease, normally very, very quickly. And they can only do it because they can compensate. They have the money to compensate those people. Our government, we just do not have the money to do it. And also because until fairly recently, we didn't have these viruses occurring in dairy herds. So in beef herds, they're barely affected. They might have a lump or something, a bit of a sore mouth for 2 weeks, and then they carry on. And in fact, it was so mild, we were even considering saying, why don't we just live with the disease and, stop calling it a control disease until it got into the dairy herds. It's a totally different picture in dairy herds. And you can imagine if you slaughter out a whole herd, the genetic loss that you suffer as a result. So we're the first country to actually continue producing milk in the face of an outbreak on active infected farmers, and it actually makes us the world experts in terms of probably how not to do it. But no, unfortunately, no compensation. The best closest you can get to compensation is that the state vet will vaccinate your animals for free. Sorry.
Sankwa, you can ask your question.
Thank you. Good day or good morning. I think my question is that thanks, Doc, for your presentation. I think my question is to, when you look at the means of controlling it as you are describing it, but I'm trying to think if you consider small-scale farmers or communal farmers, what is the contribution in spreading the disease, or which might result to the failure of controlling the disease in the country? Is there any possible contribution?
Yeah, I think the informal farmers are as guilty as the commercial farmers in spreading the disease. I don't think any group particularly is more to blame than any others. The problem with your informal farmers, though, is that they tend to kraal their animals communally. So you have different owners who have animals, and all these animals are kept together tonight, and then tomorrow morning they each take their animal in their separate directions, where they mix with other animals from other kraals, which then also go back to their communal kraal in the evening. And that's just how the disease is spread in the informal areas, because there's no fencing. They don't have feed, so they can't quarantine the animals. They'll keep them in for 2 or 3 days, and then it's like, sorry, these animals are hungry. They've got to go and feed. And so off they go. So it's very, very difficult to control in the communal areas, whereas on commercial farms, obviously they're fenced. It's easier to control. But it's also spread from the commercial farms to informal farms and vice versa. So yeah, they are a contributory factor. The other thing is because these informal farmers tend not to have purebred dairy cattle, it's more beef and more your African beef crosses, which are much more resistant to the virus. So they don't show the symptoms as much. So they might not even know they have the disease and still spread it because these cows are not really showing any severe symptoms. Thank you.
Some questions that were left in the chat. One is, can you please confirm the order of notification of suspect foot and mouth disease on your farm? You mentioned informing your neighbors. Should you not report it to your state vet before you inform your neighbors?
You should report it to your state vet first. Then if the state vet says, oh, this looks like foot and mouth disease, then inform your neighbors. You can inform your neighbors beforehand. I mean, I think it's only a good courtesy to say, look, I think I might have foot and mouth. I'm waiting for the state vet to come and confirm. If they know, they can take actions, and they can at least, sharpen up their biosecurity, etc. So I think, yeah, I think it's just good neighborliness inform them, look, I think. And then if it comes back negative, then you phone them and say, oh, good news, it's not foot and mouth disease. Obviously, if it comes back that it's positive, then it's good that they knew beforehand. So, yeah, I think if you can inform them, the sooner the better.
Okay, then another question is, where can one report the illegal transport of animals in foot and mouth disease zones, particularly during late afternoons, evenings, weekends, especially on rural roads? Additionally, how should one report farmers who allow their cattle to roam along the road? Shoulders in the affected zones. Is there a central contact list with phone numbers or email addresses for such reports?
Oh, this is a difficult one. Ideally, there should be a JOC, a Joint Operations Committee, in every affected area. And this Joint Operations Committee is where the state vets, the municipality, law enforcement, the local vets, the local agricultural societies, and the local co-ops, and everybody get together around one table, and they spell out whose responsibility is what. The biggest problem we have is first that the police don't really know what to do with animals that are transported illegally. They don't even know how to identify them. They don't know that the F brand on the neck, if the animals were branded, it designates that they're foot and mouth disease positive and that they may not be moved, etc. And so that's where the JOC comes in, to make sure that everybody's on the same page and that they understand it. You can contact the local law enforcement. That's the first part, and hopefully get a response from that. And if it's not in the evenings or on the weekends, hopefully you'll be able to get hold of a state vet. So that's the first thing I would recommend as well, is contact your state veterinarian. The problem with what the police have is, if they get these animals, there is no foot and mouth designated quarantine area to like a pound to take these animals. That's frequently a big problem as well. So they've confiscated the animals. Now, what do they do with them? Where do they take them? They're not allowed to transport them around either. So these are the things that the local JOC needs to arrange and sort out. So, and these JOCs need to be set up countrywide prior to foot and mouth disease getting to any area. So that once a foot and mouth disease gets to an area, the JOC is activated and these people can respond. In the Eastern Cape, it took about 4 weeks or so to really get the JOC up, and maybe even 6 weeks to get the JOC up and running, before there were roadblocks and animal movement controls and all these things brought in, and before everybody started to understand the problem. But then that's why, if these JOCs are set up prior to outbreaks, the foot and mouth disease abattoirs can be designated. The milk processors can prepare themselves for, will they be able to double pasteurize or UHT treat the milk, and if not, where they're going to send it, etc. Where are you going to put the animals that are impounded? Do the police know how to identify animals? What does a movement permit look like? Do they even know whether these animals are illegally being moved? So, but yeah, if you notice any illegal movements, contact your state vet. Failing that, contact the local police. I guess keep your fingers crossed that they know how to handle it.
Diana, you can unmute yourself and ask your question. Does not seem like she's still with us. Reinder, you may ask your question.
Dr. Mark, I just want to know, there are rumors that sheep and goat can also be carriers of the foot and mouth disease. Is that true? Thank you.
Yes, all animals with split hooves, your cloven-hooved animals, potentially can get foot and mouth disease. Sheep and goats can get it. They seem to be quite resistant to it. And even if they do get it, they don't seem to show many symptoms. So the result is that, yes, they can carry it and transfer it without you actually knowing that they've got it. I know in the Eastern Cape, I'm not sure if they found any of them positive. But I do know that the state vet on the farms where there were sheep, goats, or pigs, they tested them as well for foot and mouth, wherever there was, to make sure that they weren't the carriers or the spreads of the disease.
Diana, you may go ahead and ask your question.
Hi, thanks again very much, Dr. Charms, for all your information and feedback. Just wanted to know about the Starvac Hipra. It's not really obviously a preventative, we all know that, but what are your feelings on helping, as a kind of pick me up, build me up on the udders of the dairy cows, because I believe Gauteng, a lot of the farmers were using it there. What are your feelings on the Starvac Hipra as a booster on trying to prevent, further losses on your dairy animals, udders?
Sorry, just help me on the Starvac Hipra. What does it contain? I'm not that familiar with the product. Is it a vaccination or a mineral supplement?
Sorry, it's an injectable suspension, basically, that you give it to your animals in 3 doses. It's more like a booster. It was used for preventing and getting rid of staph in udders, mastitis, or assisting with that. But most people are trying to use it as a booster, to assist the udder healthiness, basically.
Yeah, well, anything that will assist with the immunity can only be a good thing, and I don't think it'll do any harm. Put it that way. As for its effectiveness, I can't vouch for it. I'm not that familiar with the product, and I've certainly not spoken to any farmers that have used it, so I don't have any first-hand knowledge. But for instance, say Staph aureus, a lot of cows might be carrying Staph aureus and not showing it. As you know, Staph aureus comes and goes and it can hide. But when they have foot and mouth disease, obviously the immunity of the udder is broken down, and then these secondary infections tend to flare up, which might normally have been kept under control by the cow. So anything that boosts the immunity will certainly assist the cow in that case. And I don't think it'll do any harm. I think it can only help.
Thank you.
Another question asked in the Q&A section is regarding affected areas and farms. For milk destined for sale outside of South Africa, is it only UHT milk and double pasteurized milk permitted for export?
I don't think double pasteurized milk is permitted for export, but products manufactured from double pasteurized milk may be exported. But as far as I know, UHT milk, this is according to the WOA guidelines. That's the World Organization for Animal Health. But these are guidelines. So any country will decide for themselves what product they are willing to accept or not accept. So even though WOA might say, oh, this milk is safe, for instance, we had that situation with Eswatini right at the start. They just refused to take any milk that originated in the Eastern Cape, whether it was UHT or not. But that's their prerogative. It's their country. They can make the rules. I think that has since been resolved through the various government departments. But as far as I know, it's only UHT, and then generally products manufactured but the milk must be double pasteurized. But it's a complicated field, and the rules are different for every country.
Another question is, what are the effects of feeding colostrum milk from cows infected with foot and mouth disease or recently vaccinated? Should this colostrum also be dumped?
If it's an infected cow that's got foot and mouth, an active infection of foot and mouth disease, then you're going to infect your calves. If it's cows that are just vaccinated but you're not infected, that milk's perfectly safe to give to your calves. The question is, how long is the virus excreted in the milk? From research I've seen, it's up to 56 days. So it means for about 6 weeks, probably. from the day that the cow first started showing symptoms until it's about 6 weeks. You probably shouldn't be giving that milk to your calves. The problem is, though, that the virus is excreted in the milk for about 2 days before the animals start to show symptoms. 2 to 4 days before they show symptoms, they will already have virus in the milk. So once you have foot and mouth disease on your farm, you just, unfortunately, all the colostrum milk will have to be discarded, and you're going to have to feed your calves powder milk, I would say, for probably for about 3 months.
Another question is, because this is a viral infection, can the E. coli or EB counts of these cows increase in their raw milk, or will an increase in E. coli EB counts rather indicate poor hygienic conditions of the shed?
Yeah, unless there's E. coli that actually gets into the udder, the E. coli shouldn't increase. But because the cow's immune system is now compromised, they are less likely to fight off other bacteria and viruses in their system. So, yeah, you might see an increase in the E. coli, but generally the E. coli would be associated with hygiene conditions and not a direct effect of the virus. It will be an indirect effect because of the mastitis, making the cow more susceptible to infections. But the virus itself will not increase the E. coli, no.
If there are any other questions, please raise your hand or leave it in the chat. Does not seem like there are any more questions.
Thank you, Dr. Mark. For once, again, an excellent and insightful presentation. I could see from the reaction of the delegates with the clapping of hands this was really an excellent presentation. You absolutely add value to our industry, and we greatly appreciate you. So thank you so much. I just want to mention, I've seen a few questions. This webinar was recorded, so you will be able to listen to it again, which is a very good point. So we will make it available also on our website, so you will be able to listen to it again. www.dairystandard.co.za. That's where you need to go to. Then our next webinar will be on the 27th of August, where Piet Grobler will discuss hygienic design. But we'll keep you posted on the social media, so please make sure you also register for that webinar. And that's all we need to say today, and thank you so much for your time. Thank you again, Dr. Mark, and may you all have a wonderful, blessed afternoon. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.